Has money changed you in any way?
I don't think so. You ask the people, friends and stuff, they'll say no.
Hey, millionaire. You're probably watching this because you spend a lot of time daydreaming about winning a giant lottery jackpot. Even if that dream came true, that doesn't mean you'll be rich. Sure, for a moment you'll be rich, but if you take a look at the stats, most lottery winners blow their cash, and some of them end up even poorer than they were before they got their big win. Sure, that's not what any lottery enthusiast wants to hear, but that's the cold, hard truth. However, it doesn't have to be that way. This list of lottery winners proves that you can actually use a lottery win to your advantage. While other winners were spending their millions, these winners were being smart. And thanks to their clever approach to being overnight millionaires, they're still rich today. Let's hope they serve a good example to you if you ever win. Wouldn't it be great to be rich for the rest of your life? Let's take a closer look at how they did it.
Section I wrote, earned/won. And so at some point I'd put it out there that I really thought that I was going to win the lottery.
Brad Duke. In 2005, Brad Duke was a 33-year-old fitness instructor working in Idaho. He played the lottery often, but you can bet that he had no idea his lucky day had come. At the time, the Powerball jackpot stood at a life-changing $220 million. But Brad didn't know that. He stopped for gas, checked his ticket, and was shocked by the clerk's reaction. He'd won. He wasn't sure how to react, so he grabbed the ticket and left before the clerk even had a chance to tell Brad that he'd won the jackpot. Brad spent the next few days thinking he'd only won a few $1,000s. Imagine his surprise when he finally found out he was actually a millionaire. Brad didn't tell anyone about his good fortune except for his dad. Together, they sat and planned what to do with the money, while Brad kept living his life and going to work like nothing had changed. Brad took home $74 million after taxes and set a goal to grow his wealth to $1 billion within the next 15 years. He put together a team of lawyers and financial advisors to ensure he didn't blow his chance. Has he reached his $1 billion goal? Well, not exactly. Unfortunately, some of his big early investments went sour when the 2008 financial crisis hit. But even with his misfortune, he's definitely not broke. In 2016, he's estimated he's added $100 million to his fortune over the years. That's pretty impressive, and he also used his money for good by starting the Duke Foundation, which has raised about $1 million for residents of Idaho, and he did this all while still doing his normal job for years. Peter Lavery. In 1996, Peter Lavery was working as a bus driver in Ireland. He was earning the equivalent of only a $300 paycheck, but luckily, he still found the money to play the UK National Lottery every now and then. He never made a better decision than purchasing that ticket. It was the winner of a huge jackpot worth 10.2 million British pounds. That's about $12.5 million. And, in case you don't know, lottery winners in the UK aren't required to pay tax on their winnings. That means he took home every cent that he won. That was a huge sum of money back in 1996, and Peter knew exactly what he wanted to do with it. It didn't take him long to invest in whiskey. He described it as a feeling like he'd won the lottery all over again. He went into a partnership with Cooley Whiskey Distillery to produce the well-reviewed Danny Boy blended Irish whiskey brand. That was his only investment, though he made a lot of not too big investments in many different businesses and also started buying property and real estate developments in Northern Ireland. He owns an impressive 30 properties. With the money he was making, he also started getting involved in an increasing number of local charities, including the Northern Ireland Children's Hospice and his own foundation, which he named after his parents. But how much money has he really earned out of his lottery winnings? You'll be impressed. He's actually succeeded in tripling his winnings over the last few decades. But he did step down from his whiskey business recently.
We want to certainly benefit our community and our church.
Les Robbins. In 1993, Les Robbins was working as a substitute teacher. Times were tough, though he was only earning $20,000 per semester. He loved working with the kids, but that's not a great salary, even for a job you enjoy. But it wouldn't matter soon. Les was the holder of a jackpot-winning Powerball ticket. You can only imagine how he felt when he learned he'd won the biggest jackpot the US had ever seen at the time. He split his winnings with the woman who was his fiancée at the time. They've split up since, but that doesn't matter. Les still has a lot of money, and he needed to work out what to do with it. He wanted to do something he was passionate about, and he loved working with kids so much that it seemed like a no-brainer. He set up Camp Winnegator. It's a dream day camp for kids spread across 226 acres of land. Les added everything he could think of to his camp: a swimming pool, a gym, a mini golf course, and even horses that the kids could ride. And that was pretty much all he spent his winnings on. I guess if you got your dream, you don't really need anything else. He did buy himself a Jeep, but with all that cash, that purchase seems modest. But where is he now? Well, aside from a problem with the company tasked with managing annuity payments that led to a court case that Les won, he's been keeping a low profile. He went back to being a substitute teacher back in 2000 when he was offered a long-term job, but it looks like he did that because he wanted to, not because he needed to. At the time, his camp was still operating at full capacity most days. Some sources say it closed recently, but others say it's still going. Deanna Simpson. Deanna Simpson was working as a hairdresser in Sheffield, England before she won the lottery. Her life wasn't exactly easy. Money was seriously tight in her family, and at one time, Diana had less than $15 in her bank account. She was also trying to be there for her severely disabled brother, who she was very close to, but no amount of attention could have saved him. Sadly, he passed away due to an epileptic fit when he was just 40 years old. Deanna was devastated, but with so little money, she didn't have time to grieve the way she wanted. She was feeling pretty low when she says something incredible happened. She fell asleep one night in a deep depression, and she had an amazing dream. In her dream, her late brother came to her and told her that if she bought a lottery ticket for the next draw, she would win the jackpot. He even told her exactly what numbers to play. When she woke up, she decided to listen to what her brother had told her. Sure, maybe it was just a dream, but she had nothing to lose by listening. She was a regular lottery player who always used the same numbers. But this time, she used the new numbers her brother had told her in her dream instead. When the draw happened, she was sitting in her brother's chair at her parents' house. They watched together as the numbers Deanna's brother had given her were read out, one by one, on the TV. Nobody could believe it. Deanna was now holding a winning UK National Lottery ticket worth £5.3 million, and it was all thanks to her late brother. That's over $6.6 million. Deanna was one of the smart ones. She invested her lottery winnings into property over the next 20 years, and she even started her own property business with her son. She said she did spend some on luxuries, though mostly she loved being able to pamper her parents before their deaths. That was something Deanna felt was important because her parents had spent their whole lives working very hard and never earning very much money. In early 2020, she's now helping to train disability assistance dogs with a local charity called Support Dogs. She says it's something close to her heart because the dogs are trained to help people like her brother. Her lottery money means she has a house with a garden big enough to train puppies who will go on to help people with disabilities. Neil Wanless. Making money as a cowboy can be pretty tough these days. 23-year-old Neil Wanless was struggling to pay his bills back in 2009. That is, until one day when he went to run errands in a nearby town called Winner. While he was there, he decided to pick up a Powerball ticket. It turned out the town's name was a good omen for Neil. He used the birthdays of his family members as his winning numbers. But even though he was joking about winning, he had no idea he really was holding the jackpot ticket, and it sure was the right time to win the Powerball jackpot because it had rolled over to an insane amount of cash. When Neil woke up and checked the lottery numbers, he was shocked to learn he was the only winner of a $232 million jackpot. He was so shocked that he took a whole month to collect his winnings, but that might have paid off. In that time, Neil and his family were planning what to do with their sudden wealth. But unlike most lottery winners, Neil had no interest in quitting his job. He loved what he did and decided he'd invest his lottery winnings back into his work. The first thing he did after collecting the money was to get the family a better ranch. So he bought 23 square miles of land worth $9.9 million. He also got himself a house, which was a big upgrade on the trailer he'd been living in since the bank repossessed his family home. He used more of his cash to help his town in all sorts of generous ways. After that, he almost totally dropped off the radar, refusing to do interviews to try to maintain his privacy. That is, until he decided to sell his ranch. In 2020, he put the ginormous property on the market. His reason? He'd married a girl from Canada. They now spend most of their time in British Columbia and their winter home in Arizona. He just doesn't really use the ranch anymore. The ranch hasn't sold yet, but Neil dropped his asking price to $37.5 million. He's still considered one of the richest men in South Dakota. What would you invest your lottery winnings into? Let us know in the comments. Jason Fry. Jason Fry from Florida is the type of person you'd call hardworking. Before he won the lottery, he was working 3 jobs. He was pouring concrete, digging wells, and working as a bartender at night. But even with all that work, he had almost no money. In fact, it was so bad that he was about to lose his property. That's the last thing you need with a second baby on the way. Jason was pretty stressed 3 days before Christmas. That might be what pushed him to buy a lottery ticket that day, when he almost never did. According to Jason, he'd only bought a few lottery tickets in his life, but it's a good thing he decided to buy one this time. Overnight, all Jason's money problems totally disappeared. That lottery ticket was the winner of a $47 million jackpot. Jason did take advantage of his new wealth. He impulsively bought a boat, a motorcycle, a Mustang, and a house. But after his spending spree, he quickly changed his mind about the way he was spending his money. He realized he wasn't being smart and switched to a very different kind of spending instead. He started investing in a business. He bought a golf driving range to start, which earns him roughly $300,000 a year. He then decided to buy a Battery Plus franchise store in Fort Myers after visiting the one his friend owns. After that, he bought another 3 Battery Plus stores. All these stores bring even more revenue for Jason every year, and his battery business has made him into a local celebrity. He still earns money all the time, adding to all the lottery money he still has in his savings. Robert Salo. Teenage lottery winners are usually the first to lose their fortune. They mostly don't think about their future, and that means they spend their money on the most stupid things until they have nothing left. Robert Salo wasn't one of those teenagers. He lived in Brooklyn, but his family wasn't very wealthy. He always wanted to be an electrical engineer, but he was already 18 years old, and his family didn't have the money to pay for his studies, so he could qualify for his dream job. He had pretty much accepted that he'd need to go into a different career when he bought a $2 scratch-off ticket. He had no idea that such a simple purchase would change his life. He won $1,000 a week for the rest of his life. That's about $48,000 a year before taxes. If you're thinking that only the big jackpots make a real difference, you're wrong. That meant that Robert could pay for his studies so he can become an electrical engineer like he had dreamed. And that's exactly what he did with the money. His parents didn't have to worry so much about him anymore, and he completed his qualifications. Even a small lottery win can help people to live the life they always wanted. If you want to play the lottery from the comfort of your own home, make sure to check out the link in the description below. It's fast and easy. Yancey Hicks. If you think that Robert is the only person who turned his life around with a small win, you're wrong. Yancey Hicks can join that list. Yancey won the Illinois State Lottery jackpot. It wasn't a huge sum of cash. The jackpot was only $1 million. But that's more than enough to create a new life if you spend it wisely, which is exactly what Yancey did. Before the win, he'd been working at McDonald's for a very long time, and all that time, he'd been dreaming of being his own boss one day. It didn't look like that was ever going to happen until his lottery win. After that, he had the money to buy his own Subway restaurant. It was a great investment. The restaurant was a huge success and is still earning money today. Yancey Foligar. And here's another teenager who bucked the trend and actually invested their money wisely instead of spending it on stupid stuff. Yancey Foligar was only 18 and living in Cumbria in England when she got her big win. She was working as a waitress and earning less than minimum wage at the time, but she dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She was only just old enough to even play the lottery. She'd bought a Euro Millions ticket and heard there were a few winners. However, she didn't think she was one of them. She was convinced she only picked 3 correct numbers. But when she watched the draw on TV that night, she listened as she realized all of her numbers were being read out, including the lucky star number, the equivalent of a Powerball. She'd won the jackpot. As I mentioned, she was one of a handful of winners who shared the £102 million jackpot. Yanti's share just topped £7 million, or about $8.6 million. That's a crazy amount of money for an 18-year-old to manage. She was mainly worried about losing her ticket, though, and spent ages hiding it around the house. Finally, she plucked up the courage to take it in and collect her winnings. By the time the money was in her bank account, she already knew what to do with it. She wanted to take a year to travel, and the destination she chose was Egypt. But that was her only extravagant purchase. She helped her parents to retire early and even bought them a house. She also replaced her decade-old Ford with a new car, but it wasn't anything flashy. Then she paid for her studies to become a lawyer like she dreamed. She decided to live like a normal student, but she aimed to open her own law firm one day. Her millions would allow her to do that. Since then, she's kept a low profile. Sources saying she's one of the richest people in the UK are lying. But that doesn't mean she's lost all her money. More reliable sources say she's now worth about £10 million. That's £3 million more than she won. I guess that means her career as a lawyer is going well. So that was a pretty smart investment. Paul and Sue Rosenow. Paul and Sue Rosenow were ordinary people. Sue worked at a research institute when she wasn't a stay-at-home mom, while Paul operated heavy machinery. They were pretty happy, right up until about 5 years before their lottery win, when their family suffered a huge loss. Their 2-year-old grandchild, Michaela, was diagnosed with Crab disease. Many people don't know about this terrible disease because it's so rare, but this severe neurological condition mainly affects babies and toddlers, and it almost always ends in death. There's no cure. Unfortunately for the Rosenow family, all they could do was sit and watch as they lost their beloved granddaughter to this terrible disease. 5 years later, Paul saw that the US Powerball had reached a record jackpot of $180.1 million. He only occasionally played the lottery, but he figured he might as well have a go. He kind of forgot about it until the draw came on while they were watching TV. Paul went to get his ticket while Sue shouted the numbers to him. By the time he got back into the living room, they were reading out the Powerball number. It matched. Paul told Sue they'd won, but she didn't believe him. He tricked her by saying that before, but Paul kept insisting. Eventually, Sue said they could go check the numbers. Because they didn't have the internet at home, they had to drive all the way to Sue's office to find out. It was worth the drive. Paul had won the jackpot. Luckily, Paul had an accountant friend who was able to advise them. They decided to pick the lump sum to help them retire early, and they took home $88 million. They couldn't have been more excited. They knew exactly what they wanted to do with all that cash, and it had nothing to do with mansions or flashy cars. In fact, they didn't even move out of their house. They kept living their lives just like before. They took a tiny portion of the money to make sure they could live comfortably in their retirement. They also took a little more for a trip to Hawaii and a family vacation to Disneyland with her children and one grandchild. But it was the grandchild that wouldn't be able to go that they were thinking about most. They knew exactly what they wanted to do with their millions. They founded the Legacy of Angels Foundation in honor of their late grandchild, Michaela. The foundation is dedicated to funding research into the treatment and possible cure for Crab disease in babies. Thanks to the foundation, the knowledge of how to treat the horrific disease has advanced a lot further than it would have without them. Paul said they might even be only a few years away from finding a real cure for the disease. The couple said they had always been perfectly happy with their lives, and they didn't feel like they needed the money. They said they were much happier knowing that it could improve the lives of others. Well, if that's what makes them happy, they must be ecstatic because they've definitely improved people's lives. Soon, they might even be able to say they saved the lives of thousands of babies just like their granddaughter. If that's not a good way to spend your lottery win, I don't know what is.